We'll go on to our final speakers. They are Cathy Larkman from WRN Women's Rights Network Wales and Sarah Tanburn from LGBA Cymru. And they're going to talk about the repercussions of the Supreme Court ruling on the captured Welsh government. So thank you so much, both of you, for being on.
Me and another lesbian set up Lesbian, Gay and Bisexual Alliance Cymru in 2020. We're not part of the more famous UK group, but we are obviously very much in sympathy with them. And as they've said in the witness stand, we share many of the values. Zoom is asking me if I'm speaking Welsh because I said one word, but no, I'm speaking in English. My Welsh is absolutely dire. Having said that, because we know there's an international audience here, we thought it was worth just spending a minute saying a little bit about the context that is Wales. It's one of the 4 constituent countries of the United Kingdom, and it's small, both in terms of its size and in terms of its population. It's about 3 million people live in Wales. It's not England. You can't see it, but England is sort of the bit on the right, below Scotland. But along with Scotland and Wales, all of Britain is subject to the Supreme Court judgment that you will have heard about and that we're talking about a bit. That covers the whole of the island of Britain. A lot of government in Wales is what's called devolved. It's devolved to the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, and that has been, since it was created, since the devolution began in 1999, dominated or totally controlled by Welsh Labour. So although Labour is a new government in the United Kingdom, in Westminster, it's been here a long time in Wales. We have a small government and a small, tiny political class, and there is no second chamber. So there's a real problem about scrutiny of legislation, and we have a supine and very limited press covering Welsh issues, both within Wales and across the United Kingdom. And that's a key, those 2 things are both key differences from Scotland. And I just want to point out there's been massive political capture here in Wales. These are just some of the many multicoloured flags and organisations that are diversity champions. It's absolutely embedded tightly into the political fabric of both formal elected institutions, quangos of various kinds, and all kinds of funding structures. Stonewall are absolutely through all sorts of things here. Supreme Court judgment, yay! Finally, good news, and that's good news for all women. I'm going to talk mostly about the lesbian bits of this, but there are much bigger ones. And I think it's important to say that this is the first time that the issues that arise from all the gender brew that affect lesbians have really been acknowledged. We've been jumping up and down and hanging things off bridges and talking about sex on the steps of the Senedd and so on for quite a while, but it's been quite a long time, if ever, that we've really seen our rights and the way we are being affected being talked about, particularly in court. And it's important to note that lesbians' rights of assembly and our boundaries in terms of being able to say, no, I don't want to go to bed with you and I'm entitled to say no, or I don't want to have a drink with you and I'm entitled to say that, our rights were fundamental to how the court read the Equality Act 2010. We wouldn't have had the same outcome if they hadn't understood that, and indeed said that without sex, meaning biology, sexual orientation means absolutely nothing. So it is really important to see that. And I think it's also worth pointing out, lesbian communities historically have been very ground up, very grassroots, very informal. You know, there has been a bar scene even before all this crap started happening, but it's always been a bit smaller, mostly because women have less money, to be honest, than men. Because it's been so informal, the chilling effect of the whole gender brew has been absolutely enormous. So just trying to organise without men present has become harder and harder. 3 years ago, we worked with FILIA when FILIA was in Cardiff to produce a document called The Legal Defence of Lesbian Space. And Naomi Cunningham wrote that for us, and I and others wrote a sort of short guide to that. And at that time, the advice was, you're going to have to rely on the same-sex exemptions, and that might be difficult, so be careful. Be particularly careful about any trans-identified man that claims he has a gender recognition certificate. Now, huge amounts of all that problematic stuff is out of the window, thank you to the members of the Supreme Court, and that's really valuable. So we're immensely grateful to FILIA, who are funding Naomi to do us an updated statement, updated advice. Her advice is formally to FILIA at our request, and then we are doing, it's with Naomi as I speak, a short version leaflet, and all of that will be available, we hope, by the 25th of June, both online and in print, and it'll be on our LGBA Alliance Cymru website, and it'll be on the FILIA website for anyone who wants to download it, and there'll be copies floating about and all the rest of it. I should say that advice applies to England, Wales and Scotland. Northern Ireland is pretty much the same, but just slightly different. And of course, if you're in another country than the United Kingdom, I'm afraid it's not necessarily a lot of help to you, except maybe to give you some ideas about the language. But yeah, it will provide solid advice for lesbian organisers. The other thing to say here is that Wales has had this secret route to self-ID, allegedly very progressive, but the notion that you can be what you say you are dominates all thought and policy here, whether we talk about health or education or policing or whatever, and the alphabet soup is everywhere. 4 years ago, I'm looking at Cathy like she should remind me when it's me who should know, they produced this action plan. This is the update from February 23, which is wall-to-wall gender ideology. It's absolutely predicated on self-ID, and you know, I think the word lesbian occurs in it about 4 times, but the alphabet soup is everywhere. And of course, but the alphabet soup does not mean sexual orientation anymore. It means gender identity. So that is a big problem. We, as LGBA Alliance Cymru, did a massive takedown of the draft, put a lot of work into it. We have banged very repeatedly on many doors saying we should be consulted in this. If you're going to say no policy without representation, you should be representing those members of the lesbian and gay communities who don't agree with this absolute rubbish. But that has continued to be very difficult. I think the sad thing is that even post the judgment, we continue to be ignored. I'm looking on my screen at a letter from actually the Westminster Minister for Equalities, who is a Welsh MP, and also reports to the Welsh Secretary of State, and a lesbian. And frankly, she should be ashamed of herself, because she absolutely, although she did agree to meet with us, is just completely not interested in understanding anything we have to say. That's just the latest example of a continuing and ongoing problem. So one of the reasons we wanted to come and talk here is that whilst it's true that we've had a major victory in the Supreme Court, and whilst it's true that we in Wales hope to promote the lesbian community all over the United Kingdom, and we're really keen to do that, we still have a very serious problem around all sorts of issues, including access to funding and including basic erasure of our culture. It sounds a bit silly to say all that, given what we've just heard from Afghanistan, but that is our situation in Wales. I'm going to hand over to Cathy now, who's going to say a bit more looking forward.
I'm the coordinator of Wales Women's Rights Network, but I'm also a director of the Women's Rights Network nationally. Many of you will know anyway, we're a grassroots group, essentially. We were formed out of what was originally the shoppers groups in various parts of the UK. And we've got women of all political parties and none as well within our midst. And I didn't think I was going to be doing this several years back. And I'm sure I'm not alone in sort of saying that amongst the women who are here today, but we all must do what we must do. And, the other sort of big thing that I sort of campaign on as a time-served police officer is about anti-female policies within the police, but that's another subject entirely. So here we are in Wales. Sarah's absolutely right. We've got huge battles here in Wales, despite the Supreme Court judgment, and these have been going on for some years now. And it's been a real sort of struggle for various different reasons for all the women's groups here that understand what a woman is and are prepared to fight for that as well. So going back some time, there was a proposal by the Welsh Government to introduce what was called a gender quotas bill. And this was a piece of documentation that was hiding behind what appeared to be a very good motivation, really, to ensure more political representation for women and the removal of barriers to women being represented in political life in Wales, which all seems very noble and seems, all very lovely. And, why wouldn't we support that? However, no surprise to anyone, what was actually hiding behind that was an attempt to bring in self-ID by the back door in Wales, and Wales WRN actually leaked an early version that we managed to sneakily obtain, a draft version of the gender quotas bill in October 2023, and I've included a section of it on the slide there, where the definition of woman for that that gender quotas bill would include men. So we leaked that, and a little bit of hell broke loose. But as well as them trying to introduce self-ID by the back door, we have to say we have actually got soft self-ID in place in Wales anyway, as Sarah and other women know in Wales. We've got soft self-ID in all government-funded organisations and women's groups in Wales, who all sort of nod along that men are women in order to keep obtaining money from Welsh Government as well. And, you're left then with groups like ourselves and LGBA Allies Cymru then, who don't accept any of this nonsense and obviously, completely fund ourselves really to sort of keep fighting that. So the approach of the current parties in Wales, as Sarah says, Welsh Labour have held power here since the devolution of political power to Wales. And certainly they've pushed sort of self-ID here and continue to do so. We've also got then the Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru, and their current manifesto position is one of self-ID and obtaining the powers from Westminster to change equalities legislation in Wales as well. So they're a real threat, and I'll come on to them in a little more soon. We've got the Lib Dems, who hold one seat in the Welsh Senedd, again have a self-ID position. And then we've got the Welsh Conservatives as well, who aren't anywhere near a position of holding power, but are our sort of allies on the sort of self-ID issue, it's fair to say. So this attempt for the gender quotas bill then morphed into the electoral candidates list bill when that was published. And in no surprise to anyone, although they'd sort of they tried to obfuscate things a little, but when you sort of read the detail of it, it would still allow any individual to declare that they were a woman and not be challenged on that as well for the purpose of the bill. So again, all hell broke loose, as you can imagine. I'm summarising it a little now. But WRN Wales, along with various other organisations, submitted formal representations against that bill. And although we have, as Sarah said, we have not been listened to, we've been ignored, requests for meetings have gone unanswered. WRN Wales had submitted these formal representations, and for the first time for a gender critical group, we were invited at stage 1 of the reform committee that was hearing evidence in relation to that bill. We were invited to give formal evidence at the Senedd, at the Welsh Parliament. So myself and 2 other WRN representatives attended the Senedd and gave evidence against the provisions of that bill for various reasons, including the self-ID aspect of it. And we packed out the public gallery with representatives from WRN Wales, Merched Cymru, LGBA Allies Cymru and various other women's groups that day as well. Ultimately, the bill eventually still passed the stage 1 process. However, you know, it was historic that we got our foot through the door there. And also the bill eventually, when the First Minister changed to a new one in Wales, because of the issues that we and others had highlighted, that they didn't have the legal powers to do this anyway, to interfere with equalities legislation. The thinking is that the First Minister didn't have the appetite to take on the new Westminster Wales government, really, who are likely to take the Welsh government to the Supreme Court for messing with equalities legislation, and she dumped the bill. So we lost the bill at that point, which was really good, but it was then followed, recently been followed, with voluntary guidance on diversity and inclusion. And although it's voluntary, you know, potentially it is open by political parties to be abused and to push men still as women on electoral lists if they choose to do so. So it's sort of still bubbling there on the voluntary guidance. We've got a very small circle of power here in Wales, which is not really helpful to us. It's you know, a sort of concerning issue for us here, really, and therefore a very small circle of influence around those politicians as well, with their special advisors. They're all captured, as Sarah sort of highlighted. Our media, unlike the sort of media in Scotland, really, you know, where there has been sort of a lot of attention on what's been happening there, our media is very, very timid, is entirely captured. They all move in the same circles, so they're very, very reluctant to report critically or openly on the Welsh Government on this matter. So we've been reliant on national media, you know, the Telegraph, the Times, you know, sometimes the Mail as well, really, and sort of highlighting these issues and actually showing an interest in Wales, which is a challenge in itself. So there's been little scrutiny, little accountability in Wales. There's been a failure to engage from the sort of political class with critical groups and voices, and we've really, really had to fight hard. It'll be interesting to see what happens at the next Senedd elections next year, because the voting system is changing in Wales. It will move to a closed list system where we'll be voting for the party rather than the individual. And there's also going to be an increase in the amount of elected Senedd representatives from 60 to 96. And many of the old guard from Welsh Labour, particularly the ones in and around Cardiff, I believe, Sarah, are standing down anyway. So we're going to see a lot of new ones. But it is essentially a bit of a, pardon the phrase, but it is a bit of a circle jerk, really, of the same individuals who are all involved with each other politically, all putting each other forward. What we also think is going to happen in 2026 at the Senedd elections, because of the change in voting, is that we will see potentially Welsh Labour not holding overall power anymore, and Plaid Cymru, the nationalists that I mentioned, whose manifesto position is one of self-ID, picking up a lot of votes and potentially having a Plaid Cymru First Minister as well at the Senedd. So there's a lot of danger likely to happen in Wales that, you know, when you sort of read the sort of the media of the UK, you know, you'd be forgiven for sort of missing and not realising the dangers that are happening down here. So, you know, I would just really, really want to emphasise that. Okay, so the Supreme Court judgment in Wales, you know, what does that actually look like? The picture is 3 women from WRN Wales. at an event that we held on the Senedd steps, and lots of groups attended as well. It was called Step Up Senedd, and it's not a one-off, it's going to continue. So we had the statement of the First Minister following the Supreme Court judgment, and statement of the First Minister could probably be summarised as trans, let's wait and see. Sometime at the end of the summer, after the EHRC report further, we'll have a think about it. So it's all a bit sort of depressing and sort of kicking the can down the road. So following that, not just our own organisations, but others have written to various politicians. We've had, a variety of responses, template, type responses, but we've also had responses which, say we'll have, basically that emphasise that they think that they've got all the time in the world to consider the impact of the judgment on policies in Wales, that they think the judgment is hurtful to trans people. And we've even had some that have applied completely incorrect interpretations and expressed a wish to go back and change the Equality Act. So there's some concerning stuff coming out of politicians, both Welsh Westminster politicians and the Senedd representatives, as a result of the Supreme Court judgment. And the response of organisations that we've written to, such as NHS trusts, education authorities, and lack of response from things like Welsh Women's Aid as well, has been concerning too. Okay, so I'd love to have shown you a film at this point, but I know we're short of time. But we had a great event on the steps of the Senedd, highlighting the issues around the Supreme Court judgment. We've called that Step Up Senedd. It's not the end of the story by any means. We can have further events on the steps of the Senedd as well, including large banners emphasising how many days it is since the Supreme Court judgment and the failure of the Welsh Government to act throughout all their policies, particularly the key one of the LGBTQ plus action plan that Sarah's highlighted. So this is going to go on really, and we are not letting them off the hook in relation to this. On the same week as we had the Step Up Senedd event take place, a few days later, I was whooshing up to North Wales then, because I had an invite from the Welsh Conservatives to address them on the main stage of their party conference on the implications for women of the Supreme Court judgment in Wales and what we wanted them to do. And I have to say, I never thought I'd see the day where I'd be sort of speaking at a Welsh Conservatives conference, but there you go. These are strange times indeed. So what are we doing here in Wales, really, just to sort of wrap it up? Well, we've got our Step Up Senedd campaign. We are not letting them off the hook in relation to this. We have really got, we've had to really sort of sharpen our elbows and have, and elbow our way into, for our voices to be heard here. I could give you loads of examples of where we've been completely ignored by politicians, but because of our sharp elbows, I've managed to get WRN Wales onto the Senedd cross-party women's group, and I attend that regularly as well, and I look at the faces of certain Senedd representatives who look really, really pained that they're having to endure me in the room, let alone speak to me and consider what I'm having to say. So I've sort of elbowed my way onto that committee. I'm also on the Senedd cross-party women's health group as well. And I know another group have got a representative on the Senedd cross-party violence against women and girls group as well. So we are pushing our way in there, come hell or whatever, we are pushing our way in to be heard. We're certainly not being invited in. We're certainly not receiving smiles and blessings at having been there, but we are making sure that women's voices will be heard. Our big challenge is sort of public awareness. Obviously, that's where Step Up Senedd comes in. We're going to really try and increase that as well, and just putting that pressure on continually as well. Wales is a bit of a quiet nation, really, across the UK. A lot of the focus has been on Scotland as well, but we are part of Turf Island, and there's a reason why there's a dragon, I think, on our sort of national flag, and I can see LGBA Alliance Cymru have got it on their logo as well. I think the Welsh Government need to bear in mind that many of those dragons are in the women's groups, and we're determined to keep breathing fire. Thank you, everyone.
How about ordinary people that you just meet in the street, or are they finding out what's going on, and is the mood shifting?
It depends a little bit, because I don't think it's a single answer to it. And I think that some of the people answering that, their response to that is to move quite a lot to the right. And that's a big issue. So I think, for those who don't know, we have our own, what some people would call Poundland Trump in reform. And wherever people stand on that, and whatever their other politics, they will do very well in the elections next May. There's no doubt about that. So, and a little bit of the impetus for that comes from, at least they've got their feet on the ground and they know that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. So there's that category. Then I think more and more lesbians are beginning to go, hang on a minute, that wasn't what we meant. Others, particularly if there's money involved, are more determined to stay where they are. So I think it varies quite a lot depending which part of Wales you're in. Our academies, our universities are just completely, forget it. They've really lost the plot in a lot of ways. I've just done a postgraduate degree at Swansea. That university just issued guidance on how everyone can use whatever toilet they want because we want to support our trans students. It's unlawful. I'm not pretending that it is in any way possible. So I think it just depends a lot where you are and who you talk to. But if you do the kind of street stall stuff, people do come up and go, oh, all power to you, good for you. I can't say anything in my workplace, but I really support what you're doing, and so on. So there's it's a big mixture at the moment. That's my perception, Cathy. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I'd say Wales has been very politically has been very tribal in its voting habits. It's unthinkable in some ways to Labour that they are likely to lose power in Wales. And I agree with Sarah, reform are going to mop up in certain areas as a protest, I think, more about the sort of the situation that Wales is in generally, and the reaction to sort of Welsh Labour. I think, Plaid Cymru are also going to be recipients of that anti-Welsh Labour vote, which is dangerous in itself, because I think there'll be a lot of people who would rather vote for Plaid Cymru than vote for the Conservatives because of the legacy of different things in Wales. But again, I think, people's tribalism, even though certain issues are ongoing within a party, they're quite reluctant to shake off that tribalism. That's the issue I find in Wales. And I think, perhaps I'm wrong in saying this, Sarah, and I'm dumbing it down a bit really, but we're quite a nice sort of easygoing nation, Wales, which is why a lot of the policies talk about us being the most friendliest of this or the friendliest of that. We're very easygoing. People don't get angry about things generally. So it's
okay, they're confrontationalness for the rugby pitch, on which we're not doing very well at the minute, but that's another matter. But that's where it happens. It doesn't people are very anti-confrontation in their politics.
Yeah, and I think it's because of that. So while people will agree with us individually on street stalls, etc., they might be quite reluctant to take, to translate that into anger really at what political parties are doing here.
And just
it's very interesting because you were saying this idea of soft self-ID, and also before, I think it was Cathy, you were saying you think this might take decades to unpick in Wales. And I think that's a thing that's going to play out, that there will be some countries that really push back against the implementation of trans ideology, but there'll be lots of places that just sort of quietly just get on with it in this soft, I don't know if it's that right term, but just gently don't unpick it. And it's a really big worry, isn't it?
I would really agree with that. Whether you're talking about school toilets or you're talking about whether or not Welsh women's football are going to pull their sodding finger out, there are all sorts of issues. Like, see in the chat, people talking about a women's party. There are a lot of women here who are actively supporting the ideology. I mean, Cathy mentioned Welsh Women's Aid. We could point to a lot of women's civil organisations. And when the Welsh Assembly was created, as it first was in 1999, it's called the Welsh Assembly, it's now the Senedd, there was a real lack of civic society organisation in large bits of Wales. Huge stuff in certain places, but a lot of lacking. and what there was very white and very male. So the Assembly committed to supporting lots of growth in civil society, and you get Chwarae and you get funding for Stonewall, and you get Race Equality Cymru, but some of those institutions have become their own concrete layer. Stonewall in particular. If you don't conform to what they want government to hear, you can't get to talk to them. And government doesn't go beyond Stonewall, because it is funding Stonewall to tell them what they should do about the alphabet soup communities. And the same could be said for organisations like Chwarae, which are supposed to support women's equality. So there is a real problem about where the thinking happens.
A lot of this is being driven by women in Wales. We've almost got 50-50 parity in the Senedd. You know, Jane Hutt, the Welsh Labour minister, was driving much of this, you know, not the only one, obviously at a government level, you know, within Plaid Cymru then, Helydd Vychan and Sian Gwenllian and Sioned Williams are pushing this relentlessly as well. So, you know, this has been pushed. We're up against women who are sort of pushing this hard in Wales. So just wanted to sort of emphasise that really. And the preferred group of choice at the moment, women's group of choice for Welsh Government, is the Women's Equality Network, not to be confused with ourselves, the Women's Rights Network. And, you know, the Women's Equality Network trans women are women.